Most people think long life comes from complicated things, special diets, expensive supplements, medical secrets hidden in laboratories. But the truth is, my life never looked like that. My name is George Whitaker, and I turned 82 years old last spring. I spent most of my life working as a mechanic in a small garage outside Nashville. Nothing fancy, just engines, grease on my hands, and the sound of old trucks rolling in and out of the shop. I never followed strict health programs, never counted calories, never read complicated nutrition books. But there was one habit I kept for almost 60 years. Every night before bed, I ate two simple foods. I didn't think much about it at the time. It was just something my grandmother used to do, and I carried the habit into my own life without questioning it. Only later did I realize how much those two small foods shaped my health. The habit started when I was about 22 years old. Back then, I was living in a tiny rented room above a repair shop where I worked. The place smelled like motor oil most of the time, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear the traffic from the street all night. Sleep didn't come easily in those days. I worked long hours. My back hurt most evenings, and my mind kept running through problems from the shop. One weekend, I drove to visit my grandmother in Kentucky. She had one of those old country kitchens where everything felt warm and calm. Wooden cabinets, a small table near the window, and the smell of fresh bread always hanging in the air. That night, after dinner, she brought out a small plate. On it were two things: a spoonful of natural honey and a handful of walnuts. She handed the plate to me and said, "Eat this before bed." I laughed a little and asked why. She shrugged and said something simple: "Helps the body rest." That was the entire explanation. No science, no long lecture. Just the quiet wisdom of someone who had lived a long time. I ate the honey and walnuts that night before going to sleep in my old bedroom, and for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely refreshed. I didn't think it was anything special, but when I returned home, I bought a small jar of honey and a bag of walnuts from the local store, and from that day forward, I started eating those same two foods every night before bed. At first it was just habit, but after a few months I began noticing something interesting about how my body felt. When I first started eating honey and walnuts before bed, I wasn't thinking about health. I was thinking about sleep. Back in my 20s, my body was always tired, but my mind didn't know how to turn off. Anyone who works with machines understands that feeling. You lie down at night and your brain keeps replaying the day. That bolt you couldn't loosen. That engine noise you couldn't figure out. That customer who said his truck still didn't feel right. Night after night, my thoughts kept moving like gears that wouldn't stop spinning. But about a week after I started that little bedtime snack, something changed. I fell asleep faster. Not dramatically, just naturally. My body relaxed sooner. My breathing slowed. And most importantly, I stayed asleep through the night instead of waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning. At first I thought maybe I was just more tired from work. But the pattern continued. Night after night. A spoon of honey. A small handful of walnuts. Then bed. After a few months, I noticed another small change. My evening hunger disappeared. Before that habit, I often ended the night eating whatever I could find in the kitchen. Bread, cookies, sometimes leftover food from dinner. Those late snacks never made me feel very good in the morning. But the honey and walnuts satisfied something in the body. The honey gave a little natural sweetness. The walnuts had a rich, earthy taste that made you feel full without being heavy. It became a simple ritual. Turn off the kitchen light. Take a spoon of honey. Eat a few walnuts. Drink a small glass of water. Then go to sleep. Years passed, and that habit quietly stayed with me. Through my 20s, through my 30s, through the long years of raising 2 kids with my wife, Linda. Linda used to smile when she saw me standing in the kitchen at night with my little plate. "You and that honey again," she'd say. But after a while, she started doing the same thing, especially during stressful periods when the kids were young and sleep was hard to come by. And she noticed the same thing I had noticed years earlier. It helped the body settle down. Now, I'm not a doctor. I can't give medical advice. But over the decades, I became curious about why those 2 simple foods seemed to help so much. And eventually, after reading and talking with a few nutrition-minded friends, I discovered something interesting about what happens inside the body at night. Over the years, I became curious about why that simple bedtime habit worked so well. Not in a scientific way at first, just in the quiet way a person starts paying attention to their own body. When you repeat the same routine every night for decades, you begin to notice patterns. I noticed that the nights when I skipped my little honey and walnut ritual were different. Sleep felt lighter. Sometimes I'd wake up once or twice. Nothing dramatic, but enough to feel it the next morning. So one winter in my 40s, I started reading more about food and sleep. Not complicated medical books, just simple articles and conversations with people who understood nutrition better than I did. That's when I learned something interesting. The body actually changes its chemistry as bedtime approaches. Hormones shift. The nervous system begins slowing down. The brain starts preparing for rest, and certain foods can support that process. Honey, for example, contains natural sugars that gently help the body maintain steady energy through the night. Not the kind of sugar rush you get from candy or soda, just a small, steady release that prevents the body from sending stress signals while you sleep. And walnuts, those little wrinkled nuts my grandmother loved, turn out to contain several nutrients that support relaxation. Healthy fats, minerals, and compounds that help the body regulate sleep cycles. Again, I'm not pretending those foods are magic, but together they seem to create a small signal to the body. The day is over. It's time to rest. And maybe that signal was the real secret. Because as life went on, I realized something else. The ritual itself mattered just as much as the food. When you repeat the same calm habit every night, your body begins recognizing it as the beginning of sleep. The lights get dim. The house grows quiet. You stand in the kitchen for a moment with that spoon of honey and a few walnuts, and your mind starts letting go of the day. That small pause between work and sleep became one of the most peaceful moments of my routine. Even during stressful years when money was tight, years when the kids were teenagers and the house was never quiet, Years when my wife and I worried about things parents worry about. No matter what kind of day it had been, that small nighttime habit stayed the same. Honey, walnuts, a sip of water, then bed. Decades passed, and without realizing it, that tiny ritual had followed me through nearly every chapter of my life. And looking back now at 82, I can honestly say those two small foods were part of something much bigger than a snack before sleep. They became part of the rhythm that helped carry me through a very long life. As the years passed, that little nighttime ritual became something deeper than just a habit. It became a signal to my life. By the time I reached my 50s, the garage where I worked had become my own business. I had bought it from the old owner who first gave me the job when I was young. Life was busy in those years. 2 kids growing up, bills to pay, customers knocking on the door from early morning until sunset. By the time I locked the shop each evening, my body felt worn out. My hands were stiff from holding tools all day, and my back reminded me that I wasn't 20 anymore. But every night, when the house finally became quiet, I walked into the kitchen and did the same simple thing. A spoon of honey, a handful of walnuts. Linda would sometimes sit at the table watching me and smile. "You've been doing that for 30 years, she once said. I laughed. Well, it seems to be working. But looking back now, I realize it wasn't just about the food. It was about ending the day gently. Modern life pushes people to stay active until the last possible moment. Phones, television, noise, stress, everything keeps the mind spinning. But that small ritual forced me to slow down, just for a minute. Standing in the quiet kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum softly, feeling the day finally settle. That pause between work and sleep might have been just as important as the honey and walnuts themselves. Because when the body learns that rhythm, when it understands that night is truly a time for rest, it begins to protect itself from stress in ways people rarely notice. By the time I reached my 60s, many of my friends were struggling with sleep. They talked about insomnia, about waking up tired, about needing pills just to rest. Whenever they asked me how I slept, I always gave the same answer. I keep things simple. Honey, walnuts, a quiet moment before bed. Of course, life is never perfect. There were hard years, too. When Linda became sick for a while, when the garage almost closed during a rough economic period, when the kids moved away and the house suddenly felt too quiet. But even during those difficult seasons, that small nightly habit stayed with me. And maybe that consistency, something small that never changed, helped my body stay steady through the ups and downs of life. Now, at 82, I still do the same thing every night. And the interesting part is, my body almost expects it. If I forget, I notice. Sleep feels slightly different. The rhythm feels incomplete. That's when you realize how powerful simple habits can become over a lifetime. When you reach 82 years old, people start asking you the same question again and again. What's the secret? They expect some complicated answer, a special diet, a strict exercise routine, some hidden health trick. And every time someone asks me that question, I usually smile and tell them the truth. I kept life simple. Now, I'm not saying honey and walnuts are some magical formula that guarantees a long life. Life is more complicated than that. Good genetics probably helped. Staying active all those years in the garage helped too. Walking instead of sitting all day. Fixing engines instead of staring at screens. But those two small foods became part of something bigger. They became a daily rhythm. And the older I get, the more I realize that rhythm might be one of the most powerful things a human body can have. Because the body loves consistency. Wake up at the same time. Work during the day. Slow down in the evening. Eat something gentle before sleep. Let the nervous system relax, then rest. That small routine repeated itself through 60 years of my life. Through my 20s when I was just starting out. Through my 30s raising children. Through my 40s building a business. Through my 60s when life finally slowed down. And now, through my 80s, when mornings arrive a little quieter and time moves a little softer. Every night before bed, the kitchen light still turns on. I open the cabinet. There's always a small jar of honey waiting there. Next to it, a bag of walnuts, same as it has been for decades. I take one spoon, a small handful of nuts. Sometimes I stand there for a moment and remember my grandmother's kitchen in Kentucky. The wooden table, the smell of bread, the quiet way she placed that plate in front of me when I was just 22 years old and too restless to sleep. Back then, I had no idea that small moment would follow me through my entire life. But that's how life works sometimes. The habits that shape us the most are often the smallest ones. Not big decisions, just quiet routines repeated day after day. So if someone asks me what carried me through 82 years of living, I don't talk about science or complicated health theories. I tell them something much simpler. Every night before bed, a spoon of honey, a handful of walnuts, then sleep. And sometimes the simplest habits turn out to be the ones that stay with you the longest.